let's get into some of your books, because I think that that is a really valuable area, because you've built up so much knowledge that people can go back to, they can learn more about, they can educate themselves if they're interested in what you've talked about today to continue to development. I know you brought them. Do you want to walk through each book?
Sure.
And let us know?
Okay, let me just move them up here. And this isn't all of them. This is a few of them. Ones that I've been directly involved in, I guess is probably what I should say. Well, this is the first one that we did. You're Asked to Witness. We're going to do this like this.
Perfect.
Yeah, so this is You're Asked to Witness. It was 1997, I believe we produced that one. Basically what it was is different aspects of Stalo history, right? And what was happening at that time is we were being asked to go visit students because there's no other publication out there in the different areas of the provincial curriculum. And so we worked along with Gwen Point. Gwen Point is involved with the education, really involved at that time, meeting with all the different groups up and down the valley, and as a teacher. And then of course Keith Carlson was our historian, and so he was one that kind of edited this book. And then so we think we had like, I can't remember, 17 different chapters, and I think in the end we only published 13 of these chapters. And so this was done to provide a reference material for the schools. And so we actually have a teacher's guide, and we actually have a teacher's kit. And we wanted to ensure that it was being used as well. So that's why Gwen also made arrangements to meet with teachers, talk with them about how to ensure that they felt comfortable teaching this in the schools, right? And then so that was pretty important to us. So that's the first one. So it has different things in there about veterans, about the land question, all kinds of 13 different subjects, I believe.
Right.
The second one was this one. So this is called Am Stó. And so this is about my daughter, Katherine, actually. So that's your cousin. Okay, because her mom and your mom are first cousins. So she's your second cousin.
Right.
So anyways, we realized after we did this, this one was for grade 10, 11, and 12s. Okay, so that was the target audience. And we realized that, again, meeting with Gwen, realizing that grade 4 was the provincial curriculum required that there was, to talk about culture and history in that grade. The thing was that we realized is that they were teaching about the Haida and the Inuit in grade 4. And we felt that if you're here in Stalo territory, you should learn about the Stalo, right? And so if you actually look at this book, it actually follows the format of the provincial curriculum book that they have. And so we follow the same format, and that's why you read through it and you see it talks about all across Canada, and then kind of focus in and then start talking about the Stalo. Now, the thing is, at the beginning, we were doing a fiction book. But we were totally going against the grains of Stalo culture, Stalo oral history by creating fiction, because you don't make things up. We are not allowed to make things up. When we do oral footnoting, we have to say it the way the elder told us. That's what Frank Malway actually talks about that in the first chapter of this, the importance of maintaining the integrity of the oral history, telling it the way you're told, right? And so we started making, I think we worked for about 2 weeks, and we just kept running into the wall by trying to make up a story, trying to make up a name of a village, trying to make up names of people. And finally we just said, we can't do this. We got to do something else. We got to actually pick somebody that's in grade 4, right, and do a book on that person. So my daughter at that time happened to be in grade 4. I was part of the team working, and she's actually related to Gwen Point as well. And so we picked my daughter, and then so we did all these interviews and things, and recorded important parts of her history. And so it's all about her looking into her culture. That's the fiction part of it. That's the only fiction part, is the homework that she was given to look into it. But everything else in there is all. That's all
Is this when you met Keith Carlson? Because you guys have
Uh,
been working together for a very long
I
time.
think we met in 93 or 94,
Right.
and this is like 4 years after. Yeah.
Wow. And so what has your relationship, just to take a brief pause, what has your relationship been like with Keith? How did you guys meet? And you've been on this journey together, written different books. He's done speaking engagements here in the Valley. What has that relationship been like?
Well, he's my best friend for sure. Very close to my children because we are best friends, and he spent a lot of time coming to my place, coming to salmon barbecues, coming to birthday dinners, that sort of thing. And my children actually call him and Teresa uncle and auntie because they're so close, and it's not really their uncle and auntie by blood, but by respect. It's a good way to show respect, so they call them uncle and auntie.
Right.
And Keith and I, it's what we call, I think we refer to that in this book, our place book, what sustained conversations is what he calls it, refers to it as. And it's important, I think, that people that come and do these different studies with us, that they maintain a very close relationship, sustain conversations. You can't just come in, do something, and then you're out, right? You got to maintain a friendship. And that's what this is all about. Like these people that are in this book,
Oh, that's towards
towards a new
yes,
ethnohistory.
yes.
If you look at these people that are the authors in these books, and you'll see that they're still maintain friendships here within the Stó. Some of them are the teachers way off some other place, but they still maintain their friendship, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we talk about, sustained things. You can't think that you're going to go visit an elder and talk to them, for 1 or 2 hours, then all of a sudden you have all the answers to everything in the universe. You can't do that, right? You have to develop a relationship with them. And I understood that right at the beginning. And so when Randall Paul, I used to work with Randall Paul, when him and I first started working together, that's the thing that we came up with. We said, okay, when we're going to go interview an elder, we're going first without a tape recorder. It's a just get to know them. And how are we going to get to know them? Well, we're going to talk to them. First of all, we're going to talk about ourselves, like who are we, so they can relate to us, because we knew at that time that you needed to talk about your family so that they get to know you. Then we talk about them. Where were they born? Where did they go to school? Where did they live? Where did they fish? Things like that, because we're trying to get an understanding as to what they can offer to us, right? And then once we kind of know that, then it kind of provides us with a foundation to, when we return back to them, to ask them other questions, because we know, okay, you lived over here. When you lived over here, where did you fish then? Or when you lived over here, where did you pick berries? And that sort of thing, right? And then, but you got to establish these long-lasting relationships. So you always go back. Like I went back to Tilly Terrace, I don't know how many times, 30 times, maybe more. Alan Terrace, same thing. Peter Dennis Peters, Bill Pat Charlie, Ralph George, constantly meeting with Rosaline, constantly meeting with Elizabeth Hurling and others, right? So you can't get everything all at once. You have to have the sustained conversation. And because the other thing is too, is we realize that some of these subjects that when you go talk to an elder, sometimes these are subjects that they've never thought about for a long time, or it might be something that they don't do anymore, right? And then so when you go and question them about it, they might not be able to share everything with you at the first meeting, right? Because you're just asking questions and they, oh, I've never thought about that for 30 years or something, and then when you leave, what happens is they'll remember something and they, oh, I should have told them this or that. So we knew that was happening. So that's why we'd always go back again. And we use that as we say, oh, we just want to review what you shared with us. Here's the transcript. Here's a copy of the transcript. And we just want to make sure that we got everything right. But also at the same time, they're going to go, oh, right after you left, I thought of this and this and this. So you always learn more, right? And so you're always constantly learning. You can't just learn everything from the elders just once, because they had a lifetime of learning. And so what they carry is a lifetime of learning. And even though I look at these elders that I've interviewed over the course of the years, I've never gotten everything off of them.
Yeah.
Never. I probably just got a drop in the bucket. I mean, I think the most I've learned from was probably late Rosaline George or Yamalot. I learned a lot off her, but I don't think I got everything off of her. She just had so much knowledge, and she had such a commitment to teaching. Like she shared a story with me once where she said that some of these other elders were approaching her and told her, why are you telling them everything? You shouldn't be telling them everything. You should hold some of the information back, right? And I think it is because those elders that were telling her that probably didn't have a lot to share anyways, right? And so Rosaline was getting a lot because she was sharing so much with us. And it was interesting, really felt a lot of respect for her response to that. She goes, how am I going to, or how are my grandchildren going to learn if I don't tell them everything? She said, I'm going to tell them everything, right? So she didn't listen to that elder. She's going to tell everything. And that's how she treated, that's how she was. When I interviewed her, no matter what you asked her about, she always was trying to help.
Yeah,
right. And
that's the big fear, right? Is that we're protective to a certain extent of the cultures and traditions because there's certain things you want to hold what's considered sacred. But we're at a point where when we start losing people, we start losing those ties, that connection, that understanding, and there's a balance to be found, and it's tough to find.
Yeah, but there is private knowledge too. Families do have private knowledge. Families have certain recipes to smoke salmon or certain ways of doing different things, right? And that's the private knowledge that they retain, right? But then, they'll share that with their children to make sure that their children have that. And, you have your favorite people that you have for dried salmon. Like I have my favorite, of where I go get my dried salmon or who I get my smoked salmon off, like who's the best butcher and that sort of thing, right? And you look at that, it's, that's the private knowledge that they have or the private or expertise that they retain.
Yeah.
Like Corky Douglas, his butchering of wind-dried salmon, it is like totally the best. Like I've never seen anyone cut salmon like he cuts it. Right? And when you get salmon off him, he doesn't thin it. A lot of other people will thin it. They take that strip off. It doesn't look like he does that. He just cuts it, and then when you shake it, all the strips kind of fall over without touching each other, and it has to dry like that. And you get salmon, like when you buy salmon from Lillooet or Lytton, it's like, even though they have the better weather up there and they should be able to dry salmon the way Corky does, they don't. They cut a thin strip off, and then you have really thin dried salmon like that thin. You get Corky's, and it's like that long. Like so that's what you call expertise. You recognize expertise like that when you start seeing it. You start looking at all your different sources.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so let's continue with the books.
Okay.
Which one's next?
So we finished with this. Yeah, finished with that one. Talked a little bit about Towards a New Ethnohistory. So back in 1998, again, this is under the guidance of...
just pull the microphone up.
Back in 1998, we, along with the guidance of Grand Chief Clarence Penier, I think this is actually, dedicated to Grand Chief Clarence Penier, because of his recognition of the experts that we need to involve. Okay, not only recognizing our elders as experts, but he also knew that in Western society there are also experts. There are expert archaeologists, expert historians, expert genealogists, that sort of thing, and recognizing the need for those experts if we have to go to court about Aboriginal rights and title. Right, so we recognized early on that we needed an archaeologist, so we hired an archaeologist. And then later on, we hired a historian. And then that's how this all started, was with the ethnohistory. When you look at our history, that's what this talks about. It talks about how anthropologists were doing all this different work. Then historians come in, but historians were mainly focused on looking at written records, right? And they realized, historians then realized, a bunch of them, Keith talks about that in this book, about all these other historians that realized the importance of actually talking to the people themselves, involving them. And so that's why the ethnohistory. So when they come out here, yes, of course they do history in the archives, doing archival research, but also they also go out and interview people today to talk about this thing that they were looking at 200 years ago in these documents. How does that fit in with people today? That sort of thing, right? So that's what the whole ethnohistory is about. And so when they come out, they actually spend 1 week living in the home of a host family, like Diane Kevin Gardner was probably I think they're acknowledged in here as well, as because they've opened their home up to many of these students over the course of the years, and more than one. They have like 2, 3, maybe 3, maybe more. I don't know, at least 3 people that they would host in their home. So they lived there for a week, and then they would go live in the longhouse for 3 weeks. And then every morning they had these different classes in session, and in the afternoons they would carry on with the research, right? And then the other important thing is that this is research that's important to us as well. So we play a role over the course of the year. So Dave Sheppy, myself, Back then it was Tia Halstead. She's now retired. But we were, and David Smith before her, we would look at the different subjects that we were interested in. And of course, Grand Chief Clarence Penner, with his connection with the leadership, he knew what sort of questions the chiefs had about certain things, right? So we wanted to look at research that could be helpful to us, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure the students did a good job of it. So we wanted to make sure that it fit in their interests as well. So we have this big list of possible research topics. And then we'd have a meeting with the students. Well, John Lutz from University of Victoria, Keith Carlson, who was then at the University of Saskatchewan, they would meet with their students and talk about their interests, and that's how they would come up with a topic. And so the topic was always something that we always had. And usually the topics ranged from biographies of certain people, or history of a place, like Eyam is one of them, history of Suwali, different things like that, right? So that's what this is all about. So we took, I believe, 12 or 13 of those essays and put them in this book. So this is the latest book.
That is the newest book, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then this one, Power, Place, Problem of Time, Keith Carlson, mainly. Well, he's the main author, but it's really cool because what he's done in here is looking at the different parts of our culture and our history. And again, this is something that I think he actually dedicates us to myself, because of the sustained conversations again, right? So it's really clear to me that he thought very deeply, which is what we need. People who think deeply. You can't just think shallow. And he thought very deeply of these things that we were researching. And he'd look into everything. Like, that's another thing, is looking into all the different materials that are out there. And that's what I learned when I first met him, like the research that he did on the lynching of Louis Sam. Right, he talks about that in here as well. And so all these different things he talks about in here, and it's the conversations that him and I would have. And I remember sometimes he would ask questions that was really clear he thought about, because there'd be questions that I didn't have an answer for, because I'm not, well, I don't know, getting close to being an elder. I don't consider myself an elder yet. But anyways, he'd ask questions, and I'm just like, oh, Keith, you got to give me some time to think about that, and I'll get back to you tomorrow, right? So I'd have to think about the question that he asked. But just based on his question, that he looked into it and thought a lot about it, and that's why his question is so in-depth, right? And so that's what we need, is people like that can do that kind of work, really think about it, right? And I know right now there's people out there that really think that non-Native people shouldn't be doing our research, right? And it should be First Nations. Well, I don't think so. We have our own private knowledge that we retain and that sort of thing, but, we have to recognize the expertise as well. And then when you look at the biases that you could have as an individual, right? And then we end up going to court, and you have an expert that's acknowledged by Western society, an expert that's carried on with sustained conversations and developed relationships. Like, Keith doesn't just have a friendship with me. He's got friendships in Seabird Islands, friendships in Chehalis, friendships in Suwali. So he has all these different families that he's maintained, either met with their elders and their elders have passed away, and now he maintains a friendly relationship with the family of those people, those elders, right?
Right.
So same sort of thing. So that's what this is all about. So different topics that he covers in their Power, Place, Problem of Time. So it's basically all about our different parts of our history as the colonizers come in. He talks about pre-contact, and he talks about the reserves, talks about the flood, talks about Shxw'ow'hamel, talks about the lynching of Louis Sam. So all these different things that are in there.
Sorry, about the flood?
The flood?
The Great Flood?
The Great Flood. We have our own stories about the flood.
Could you tell us about that? I've heard the Kwakwaka'wakw story, that they tied all their canoes together and the water rose. But can you tell us the flood story from here?
As far as I know, there's 7 mountains that were sticking up when the flood happened.
Right.
And so the flood happened very similar to the Christian Bible flood, I guess, but different. There's no Noah's Ark, right? So anyways, my understanding of it, there's 7 mountains that were sticking up. I don't have them committed to my memory, but I know there is 7 of them. I have it written down somewhere. But one of them is Sumas Mountain. Well, the English name is Sumas Mountain, but our name for it is Naxaxalhts, which means sticking up.
Right.
Well, why is it called sticking up, right? So that's the other thing. When you look at place names, you look at what is the place name? What does it mean? But quite often you need to know the significance. That's why when you look in this book here, the Atlas, the place names that I talk about in here, we talk about the significance of it, because you have to know the significance of it. Because sometimes if we give you the name and the meaning, it's still like, well, why did they call it that? Right? An example I always use is Carlson. Okay, that's an important part of your history, is the name of the village in Hope. That was called Carlson. It means bare or bald. So if I tell you that, there you go. Now you know. Carlson, bare or bald. Okay. Well, you're probably wondering, well, why did they call it that?
Yeah.
Right? So right away, well, why? Because well, that's the significance of it. And so there's a big picture there from that, right? And so every place name, there's always an opportunity to learn bigger things, more things about that name or the activities, things that happen there. And that's what my place name tours are all about. I don't just talk about the place. I don't just go to this is calls means Barabald. Okay, let's go. You know, it's not that. There's lots of other things that you can talk about. So when you look at the calls, why is it called calls? And so what I found out is that there's a strong wind that blows there that doesn't allow the branches to grow on one side of the trees. Well, how does a strong wind come in? Well, it's the I think Brent Galway talks, the elders told him this. It's the mountains, as you move from Chilliwack up to Hope, the mountains close in. And it creates a funnel effect. And also at Hope is where the river runs north to south. And when it gets to Hope, it turns and runs east to west. So it's also the turning point. And so when the mountains close in, you have the strong breeze that blows from downriver, blows upriver, and it's constantly blowing right there in Hope. And so that wind is always blowing, and it never gives the branches on the west side of the tree a time to grow. So anytime you go there, take a look at the tops of the trees, and you'll see that it's bare or bald.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what calls is about. Yeah.
I find the flood story, that's where things get like you have to start to get on board. You can't just think it's a story because the likelihood that there were floods, like archaeologists have all kind of concluded that there was this flood. And so when there's that interweaving between the stories of the environment around us and this flood, it's where like we know this happened and we know there's a story that goes with it. It's where that cross paths, where how far can you go? How much of this information should you get on board with? And that's where I think that door is open to believing more in these ideas and getting more invested in being like, okay, well, the fact of the matter, what we know scientifically is starting to overlap with the stories that people have. How much of those stories do you now have to grapple with are true, because there's information in there that is scientifically true. How far does that go? We don't know. We don't have the exact answer to that. Your response would likely be, I believe it full with my whole heart. And I agree with that. But for those skeptical people, it's like now this door is open and you can't close it because there's scientific facts here that you can't brush away as silly superstition anymore. Yeah. And so this is the one about place names, correct?
Yep. So this part of it, it's an atlas. It's called the Coast Salish Historical Atlas. So this book, how it all started off was we were trying to come up with something that we needed to return back to the community. So that was what we were talking about. Because one of the things we realized with these first two books, what was happening was we were constantly going out to our elders, interviewing our elders, and certain questions to come up with these different chapters, right, in these books, or else even things that don't appear in a book. It's research that we're doing for court case or whatever, right? And what we found was that the elders are treating us or putting us in the same category as early anthropologists and early linguists who would come into the home, interview people, and leave and not come back, right? I think the linguist Jim Harris from University of Western Washington was a good example of that. Like, I heard of him a lot about him going there, setting up his tent and interviewing Dan Milo, collecting the language and packing the stuff up and leaving. Made a career out of being a linguist using the Shxw'ow'hamel language. And when he retired, he came back and donated it all to us. But I think that's one of the examples the elders are talking about, because you have this linguist comes in camps and gets all this information, the elder leaves and doesn't come back, doesn't say anything more, right? And so the elders were kind of feeling the same way with us, because they're going, what are you guys doing with this information? Like, you come here and you interview us, like I said, I've interviewed Pilligater many, many times, and Keith has interviewed other elders many, many times as well, right? And then so it's like, we're getting this feeling that they're putting us in that same category. And then so Clarence Penny saying, well, we need something. We need to give something back to our community. We're taking all this information, we need to give it back. So that's what we're looking at. I think we looked at 3 different books. I can't remember what they were, but there's 3 different books that we were looking at. We were looking at a coffee table book. I don't know if you've ever seen a Nishka book. It's a big coffee. It's a book same size as this atlas, maybe bigger, but it has all these big colored pictures of different things. One of the things that it addresses is that whole stereotypical image of how there were Indians, then there's white people, and there's no more Indians, or no more First Nations, right? So, and that's how you see how books are lined up. Books, they still do that. They still do put the native part at the front, and then all of a sudden the native part's over. Now let's talk about the colonist period, right? With no interaction between natives that fitting in there. And so that coffee table book, that's what the Nishka coffee table book was, in color pictures, to show that their culture is alive. So we're not talking about something 200 years ago that's not there anymore. It's alive and well, and here's people, in doing that. So that's what we thought of. The other one that we were looking at was the Stein Valley book. And the cool thing about the Stein book is that you can open it anywhere to any one of the pages, and you can read something. There's little things in the corner about something else. So you don't have to read it cover to cover. You don't even have to read that chapter, the whole chapter. You can just flip it open, and there's something there that you're going to learn something. You have a minute or so, well, read this thing, you learn something, right? And so we thought about that as well. And then we also realized Clarence, Grand Chief Cat Pennier, was dealing with, through the chiefs, with the whole consultation and accommodation things, different developments when they came in. They had to consult with us, and they had to accommodate, our Aboriginal rights and title. And so that was right at the beginning, all that stuff was happening. And also, we were working on these different things with different university students, all this over the years, with some of the stuff that came out in this, but also before that. So we were having all this reports and things that were piling up in our archives. And so we thought, well, we need to do something with that and give that back to the community. So that's how this atlas came about. And we covered, so we wanted a big book like the Nishka one. We wanted the layout very similar to the Stein Valley one. And so that's why we have this one. And then, of course, we come up with all these different things. So different people involved in it, like John Lutz involved in, in the labor, and Keith Carlson, a bunch of different things. I was involved in the place names. Dave Sheppy was involved in the archaeology, so many different things in there. There's 725 Shxw'ow'hamel place names, and that's where my expertise comes in. Also talks about the origin of the Shxw'ow'hamel, also talks about Stlalacum, supernatural creatures. And the Stlalacum, that's the interesting chapter, how that came about was, I was interviewing Rosaline and Elizabeth Hurling because we had a deadline, right? And we needed to get these place names into this atlas. And I remember the day came where, the editorial board just said, okay, that's it, Sonny, you got to stop. I just said, I keep finding out more stuff. I'm still learning, right? Yeah. This is 20 years ago, and I'm still learning about place names, right? So we had to cut it off at that one point. But anyways, I was interviewing Rosaline and Elizabeth, and whenever we talked about a place, they'd start talking about a Stlalacum, which in our language means like a supernatural creature. They talk about a Stlalacum with these places. And at this one time, we were talking about this place, and they were talking about Stlalacum again. And Elizabeth Heron kind of looks at me, and she goes, are you going to put that in your book? And I went, put what in my book? She said, the Stlalacum. You young people, you go out into the mountains, you go out on the rivers and the creeks, and you see something or hear something, makes the hair rising on the back of your neck, and then you come ask us, what is that? Well, that's a Stlalacum. You young people need to know where those Stlalacum are. So you should have that in your book. So I brought it up to the editorial board, and everybody got a little excited. Yes, let's do it. So yes, I went back and interviewed Rosaline and Elizabeth, and from their memories, it's not a comprehensive study of Stlalacum, and we've never updated it. But there are other Stlalacum that are out there that aren't in this atlas because we just had little time And we just took what they had as S'lálacum and put a map in there and talked about what S'lálacum is all about.